Hello and welcome to the Catholic Messenger Conversations podcast. My name is Dan. I'm the host and the editor of the Catholic Messenger. Today our guest is Bishop Dennis Walsh. He's coming in for one of his regular visits. We got a lot to talk about. First, we're going to give a nod to our sponsor. We're sponsored in part today by Religious Supply Center, featuring church supplies, gifts, cards, and memories located at 1301 Jersey Ridge Road in Davenport. You can reach them at 563-324-0669. More information is at religioussupply.com. So let's get right into it. Bishop Walsh, it's March and there's snow on the ground, but people are getting heated up for the March Madness tournament. What team do you support?
Generally, I support Duke. I've always been a big Duke supporter. I spent the time of Coach K. So I've always been a Duke fan, at least the March Madness generally.
Okay.
During the regular season, I'm not a big supporter. I have other teams that I support during the regular season, but during the Final Four, Duke is usually my pick. So.
Okay, well, I'm surprised you didn't pick like Notre Dame or something like that, but Duke's a good school.
Generally, in the general season, I'll do Notre Dame or Nebraska or something like that. Iowa. So
yeah, there's a couple Iowa teams. I got to go with Villanova though this year. Villanova University. I'm from Pennsylvania, so I go for those Pennsylvania teams, and but I think especially the Iowa girls this year have a good shot at it, from what I hear. So
Villanova is the Pope's alma mater, so
that's true. Yep.
You have a little help and assistance in that one.
Well, speaking of the Pope and everything going on in the world, I hear that he's taking a trip to Africa. They've announced that. I don't know if you feel any kinship with the Pope because you're always traveling around the diocese. We have a large geographical area, and recently I was able to see you in action up in Cedar Rapids. You did some ministry there with immigrants who were checking in with Department of Homeland Security. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. I got to see you as a reporter, but can you give me some of your impressions about being up there? Tell us what you did and how it went for you.
Sure. I mean, part of the pastoral response in this immigration crisis that the United States is in is bishops have expressed a desire to do pastoral accompaniment with families who are going for their regular check-ins. And I think for the most part, the law should be very predictable. However, I think in the past year or two, it's been very unpredictable, and people going for routine check-ins where they are generally applying for asylum to stay in the United States, and they have a right to due process. Most of them are very, very faithful to checking in, and that's what they're required to do, and many of them do that. But for many of them, it's a fear-filled time, not knowing are they going to be detained at that moment before their hearing, or sent back before they can make their case for asylum. So it's a fear-filled time for a lot of families who are going through that process. There were 4 families from our diocese that I was there to accompany for their check-ins.
Now, I saw that there was a lot of prayer involved. I think Deacon Angel Hernandez did the Stations of the Cross, and there were some choirs from Iowa City parishes that were there. So it was kind of a little bit more prayerful than I think people think of when they think of a demonstration in front of a building. Just to give you a sense, there's a building in Cedar Rapids where these families, and some of them are undocumented, but they've decided to touch base with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and they have to go for monthly check-ins. Some of them are applying for asylum. I believe that one of the organizations that ran it told me that there were about 16 different or families that went that day, and the Iowa City Catholic Worker was one of the organizations that were accompanying them. One of the things I noticed, though, is that you made contact with all the families, but you also talked to the secular media. You talked to a lot of TV stations. What's it like for you when, I mean, obviously we're the Catholic Messenger, we're a Catholic media source, but what's it like, what goes through your mind when you're preparing to talk to non-Catholic or secular media? How do you handle that?
for me, it's not something I like to do. It's something that I am not really crazy about doing, but I recognize it's part of the responsibility of teaching and part of getting the prophetic voice of the church out there in the public. So speaking to the public media and the secular media is certainly a way of doing that to a different audience than I usually reach in churches and even through the Catholic Messenger. But so it's a great opportunity, I think, for a bishop to get the word out to a larger population than just the ordinary Catholic press. So.
Now, there was one other moment that stuck out to me, and that is that you made a point to go up to the Department of Homeland Security agent and make contact with him. Can you tell me what you talked about and what you were trying to accomplish there? I mean, it wasn't just you with the immigrants that you accompanied, but you did reach out there. What were you hoping to do?
So I reached out to the DHS agent who was there at the parking lot, and generally his job was to make sure that only those who had appointments or their attorneys could go through. So those who were there for this pastoral accompaniment were outside of a caution tape police line that they couldn't cross, and there was an officer who was just letting those who had appointments and their attorneys to go through and do the check-in. So as a minister of the gospel, I went requesting permission to be able to accompany our four families into their check-ins. As I said earlier, they are afraid and fearful, and that as a pastor and minister, I wanted to accompany them into their check-in. Last year, Archbishop Zinkula went. He was able to, they allowed him in to accompany families into the check-in. So with that information that they allowed Archbishop Zinkula in, I made a request that I can accompany our families into their check-in. So that permission was denied. I gave him my card, and he assured me that the director of the facility would call me.
And any follow-up yet?
There hasn't been. I didn't think that they would either.
Okay, but I just got to say, for me, the experience to me is you hear in the media about all the tension that happened in Minneapolis and the things that was fairly calm, wouldn't you say? I mean, it seemed like it was well organized.
I would say it would be a misnomer to call it a demonstration. It was certainly a pastoral presence, and they were there for one purpose, and that was to accompany families. I mean, I'm sure there were people there who were there for protest. That was certainly not my intention to join into a protest, but more as the bishop of the diocese to provide support and pastoral accompaniment to those who are going through this process.
Now, speaking of your duties as a bishop, another thing is obviously your role as a priest and a bishop. We've got Easter coming up. I wanted to ask you a little bit about what are your roles and what are your duties at Easter? Can you give us a little bit of the behind-the-scenes preparations? What are you doing right now to get ready for Holy Week?
Right now, I'm preparing myself for the Chrism Mass, which just kind of preparing my homily for the Chrism Mass. The Chrism Mass really is the highlight for a diocese. It's when the whole church should be in presence, or at least representatives from every parish should be present at the cathedral for the Chrism Mass. All priests are in attendance with their bishop. All priests will renew their priestly vows, their priestly promises of obedience and to the bishop. So those vows will be renewed at the Chrism Mass, and it's also at that Mass that the bishop will bless all the oils that are used throughout the church year. Those oils that are used for the sacraments, baptism, confirmations, ordinations, the sacrament of the sick. All those oils that a priest uses regularly are blessed at the Chrism Mass.
Can you tell, I mean, maybe some people listening don't know, why does the church use oils at those sacraments? What is the purpose of that, or where did that come from?
It's the whole notion of being anointed, so even in secular culture, the king is anointed, So in baptism, everyone is anointed priest, prophet, and king, and that's the significance of the oil, at least culturally, is to be anointed and to be sealed. And for the sacrament of the sick, it's a balm, are generally oil-based balms or are meant to evoke a sense of healing. So all of it is tied to what oil sort of evokes for us, and it evokes two notions, and one is for healing as terms of a lotion, and the other is sort of an anointing in terms of anointed for a priestly office. So
now, as a bishop, you have to do a lot of anointings, either confirmations or people that are on their deathbeds even. Are there any that stick out? And any times in your priesthood where, hey, you've had to get the oil out and do something very significant with somebody? I know you probably do it a lot, but what comes to mind as far as times that you'll never forget?
Sure. I would say for confirmations and ordinations, there's nothing that sticks out with that. However, certainly during the prayer of the sick, and those anointings have been pretty powerful moments when I've been called to a sick bed or a deathbed of somebody who's about to die, and families gathered around, and oftentimes it's very moving that you do the anointing and they die either right after you're done or soon after the celebration itself, which reminds me that people oftentimes are looking for that. They're looking for a priest in their final moments, and I think in many instances that's what they're waiting for. And once a priest finishes that, it's not unusual for someone to die in peace shortly thereafter.
Now, do you? One of the other initiatives that I've read from some of your letters is that you're promoting these holy hours for peace and justice, and we know that there's been a lot of polarization in our country for a variety of reasons. There's political polarization, but even in the church, as you said in your letter. Can you talk a little bit about why you think the U.S. bishops are asking for that at this point, and what you hope comes out of that?
I think we're living in a very divisive time, and I think it's our politics that divides us ideologically. There really is no place in the church for political ideologies. However, it sort of infiltrates all aspects of our life, including the church. It's unfortunate that it is present in the church, and that sometimes people cannot distinguish between what the church teaches actually and what their political platforms sort of promote. So ideologically, I think we're in a very divided time. And I think the church needs to remind people what the gospel actually teaches, calling us all to peace and not to achieve some political ideology or political purposes and building political narratives and agendas.
You're always busy. Are there any things coming up that you're looking forward to, or that you think people should know about, other than maybe they could go to the Chrism Mass if they wanted to?
Well, I think generally, I think the Chrism Mass, it's unfortunate that many Catholics do not make an effort to be part of the cathedral celebrations. However, the notion and the ecclesiology of the church is that we are a church of communion, right? We are a church in communion with our bishop, right? And that for many people, they identify their Catholic life centered around their parish and not necessarily their bishop. However, it really is an affirmation when people come to the cathedral to celebrate this really high feast of a diocesan church. Is a sign of communion with the bishop. So I would encourage people to attend the Chrism Mass, but I would also encourage Catholics in their home parishes to participate in the Triduum. As a priest and as a pastor, the Triduum is always my favorite liturgy of the year, Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday. I often said as pastor that there are such important feast days that nobody goes because the liturgies are oftentimes longer, and we become very transactional in our understanding of church, that we go and we fulfill an obligation and that's it. But the Triduum really is the high feast of the local parish community, and Catholics should make an effort to do the whole Triduum, the Holy Thursday, the Good Friday, and the Holy Saturday. Those are three services, but they're one liturgy. You know, they're it's not three liturgies over 3 days. It's one liturgy over 3 days is what it is. So
now we're coming up on our time limit, but there's one more thing I wanted to ask you about. We've done some reporting in recent weeks in the Messenger about this increase in the number of candidates and catechumens coming into the church. It's not just in Davenport, but this year we're seeing, I believe it was a 40% increase in candidates and a 90% increase in catechumens. Don't quote me on that, folks. It's in the Messenger. You can check it out in the last 2 issues. But that's a one-year jump. But if you look at the international scene, all across the church, there's been an increase in the last several years. I was just wondering your perspective on a bishop about that. Have you noticed the trend, and what do you think about that?
I think there's a very real trend, and what is inspiring to me is that it is happening in places, especially throughout the world, where the church has always been viewed as dead. In Scotland, I just read an article yesterday, the numbers that are being experienced in Scotland, very secular country. France, I mean, the very Catholic country at one time, and actually had the honorary title being the daughter of the church, but over the years it's been very secularized. However, even in France, the number of young people who are returning to the faith, they're returning in incredible numbers, and we also see it here in the United States, throughout the country, where young people especially are returning to the faith and to the practice of the faith. In many ways, I think it's a rejection of the secular values that are so prevalent in our culture and our society. And I think younger people especially are recognizing that they're looking for a sense of authenticity, and I don't think they're finding it in secular institutions or in the places where their parents or grandparents may have told them will bring them happiness. I think people are recognizing that there's a lot more to life than a good career and having a lot of stuff. Recognizing that there's a spiritual side of life that is oftentimes missing. So I think many people are responding to this void in their life and longing for and hungering for a sense of the sacred and a sense of the divine presence.
And just to close, we started the podcast by talking about the immigration issue today, and we're speaking today the day after St. Patrick's Day. And I know there's a great history and heritage of Irish immigration. I think 13% of the population of Iowa identifies as being of Irish heritage. Is there any inspiration that you take from either St. Patrick or any of the other Irish saints that you know about? And how does that influence your faith?
I would say St. Patrick, for whatever reason, has a universal appeal, not just for the Irish, but for everyone in general. Why that is, not really sure, and maybe people can identify with the story of St. Patrick. St. Patrick had a rough life, and we oftentimes have this idealized version of St. Patrick chasing the snakes out of Ireland and so forth. However, he was trafficked into Ireland. He was sold into slavery. He escaped from slavery, became a priest and became a bishop, and the church sends him back to Ireland, the place where he was enslaved. And he goes back and proclaims the gospel. So it is, in this day and age, where we're talking about immigration and trafficking and so forth, Patrick is certainly an inspiration in that he himself was trafficked into a foreign land and also escaped and found freedom and was able to return and proclaim and preach the gospel. So I think the story in itself, apart from green beer and all the silly customs that we've sort of adopted regarding St. Patrick's Day, St. Patrick is a very inspirational character in the life of the church and inspires many, many people.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to say before we close, Bishop?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I'm going to close with another mention of our sponsor. We're sponsored today by the Religious Supply Center, featuring church supplies, gifts, cards, and memories, located at 1301 Jersey Ridge Road in Davenport. You can reach them at 563-324-0669. More information is at religioussupply.com. I'd like to thank you, Bishop, for coming in. I want to thank Dave Baker and KALA for hosting us today. And you guys have a great Holy Week coming up, and happy Easter.
Thank you.